It may be impossible to understand where a monk fits in today's world. Monks go against the grain of modern life. They occupy a mysterious place, somewhere between fear and fascination. At Mepkin Abbey, near Charleston, South Carolina, 30 Roman Catholic monks live in a community of prayer and work. They are on a spiritual journey that struggles to accommodate a rapidly changing world. They are Trappists. The history of Christian monks goes back 1,700 years. Their story is shrouded in myth and obscurity, but how they have survived 17 centuries holds some lessons for the modern world. About 700 Christian monasteries exist today. 100 are in the United States, and 17 of those are Trappist. Trappists have tried to preserve the strict lifestyle of early Christian monasteries, following a code that was born in the ruins of the Roman Empire. To an outsider, the Trappist life is a shock. They wake every day at 3 a.m., worship together 7 times a day, eat a strict vegetarian diet, and spend much of their time in silence. Their rule requires that they never marry, never have children, and leave their families behind.
I can see it right now. We were all sitting on the porch, and I'm the oldest of 4. I told my family that I was going to a Trappist monastery. Well, my mother had no idea what this meant, so she turned to my father and said, "Well, what does this mean?" And my father, without skipping a beat, said to my mother, "That means we'll never see him again."
It was very difficult for my mother. My mother's belongs to another Christian community, and at one point, right before I left, she said, "Do you want me to refuse you, to forbid you to do it?" And I said, "If you do, I'll leave at 21.
But I knew I had to do this. I knew within myself that God was calling me to do this. And at that point, I made a decision about who I was to be for the rest of my life, and not just being a monk, but being me.
My father, he experienced it as a rejection of himself. And so my father wrote me off when I entered the monastery. I was his firstborn, and he wanted me to go into the business with him, and for him it was a rejection. For me, it was, this is the way I was raised, to do what I felt called to.
I went to Benedict in high school. It was a military school. I dated, I was manager of the basketball team. But there was this other thing that was just kind of always there, and it became kind of the driving force in my life.
The hardest time was my first 3 weeks here, because it was the first time I was ever away from home. I was homesick for a girlfriend. After that first 3 weeks, I've never really thought of leaving.
St. Anthony of Egypt is credited with founding Christian monasticism around 275 AD. At age 20, he gave away his possessions to live a hermit's life in the desert. Over the years, many others followed his example, and eventually they came together to establish small communities that became models for true monastic life.
The ancient monks joined together for support, because you can't do this inner journey, this inner struggle alone. You'll quickly give up the struggle, or it will get so compartmentalized that it won't have any meaning any longer. So to keep us on the right focus, monks have always come together.
The monks of the Roman Catholic Church trace their roots to the late 300s, when St. Martin of Tours brought the life of the Egyptian hermit to his French homeland and founded Europe's first monastery. Thousands were attracted to the monk's life of brotherly love, communal work, and prayer. This new way of life was a revolutionary change from the ancient pagan principle of might makes right.
We're countercultural because that's the way God has set up his gospel. That's counterculture. That's not the way it should be. The least shall be the greatest. The greatest shall be the least. If you want to be the greatest, you serve. That's not the way any society works. That's why we're countercultural. It's just the gospel. Lived to a pretty radical degree.
Christian monasticism spread through Europe like sparks from a fire. But by 500 AD, the growing number of unorganized monks was becoming a problem. Although they were an effective force in spreading Christianity among the pagan tribes, many were becoming a nuisance, and others were straying from their vows. The time was ripe for reform, and the 6th century brought a reform that would become the great unifier of Western monks, the Rule of Benedict.
We vow ourselves to this monastic way with its observances and its tradition and its built-in mechanisms of community and obedience. And even at the time of St. Benedict, they had a sense of a tradition that was life-giving, that pulled people out of their own individual journey and gave them a much fuller life than they could ever have on their own.
Benedict of Nursia was an Italian monk with a gift for organization and a profound insight into human nature. In his monastery cave at Subiaco near Rome, he created a concise guide that laid out how a monastery should work and pray. It has been followed by most Catholic monasteries for over 1,400 years.
The Rule of Benedict is a summation of monastic practice and tradition from the beginning. It's absolutely central in our lives. We read it or meditate or think about it every day.
The Rule of Benedict requires 3 lifetime vows of its followers: stability, obedience, and conversion of manners.
Stability is not so much penning in people as it is providing a stable structure wherein I can sustain in community this pursuance of God as God is outlined in the gospel. There's something definite about my commitment to this place, this piece of land, this piece of geography has meaning in God's plan for me. I'm going to find my world, so to speak, and my world is a spiritual world in the geography. I'm going to find all that I need and all that I'm expected to do and to experience right here.
Well, with us, the vow of obedience concerns every aspect of our monastic life. It's simply the rule that you entered, and you entered voluntarily. If you say you're subject to obedience, no, I'm subject to obedience, but I voluntarily submitted myself to obedience.
Conversion of manners means a gift of oneself to this particular lifestyle, to this particular monastic lifestyle. And the monastic lifestyle implies poverty, and it implies chastity.
The Rule of Benedict touches every aspect of a monk's day. The Trappists at Mepkin Abbey follow a strict schedule of prayer, work, and study. Their day begins not with a race against the clock, but with 5 hours of prayer, song, and meditation. It begins in the dark at 3 a.m. with a quiet service called vigils.
We start most vigils with Psalm 95. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts, when it is quite hard, quite resistant at that time of the morning. But if you can break open your heart, then all the unseen things of humanity just come flooding in. And you walk outside in the river in the dark and you can hear a symphony of sounds. The ancients could tell the time of night by the feel, the smell, the temperature, and the stars. That kind of sensitivity is what we try to develop, and it makes all the difference between a contemplative life and some other kind of life.
After prayer and reading the Bible, work is the most important part of a monk's life. In the early Middle Ages, a strong work ethic drove the monks and created great monasteries that were centers of commerce and learning. The spectacular illuminated manuscripts from that period are just one example of what the combination of hard work and spirituality accomplished.
Physical work is vitally important to keep the balance right. The main focus of our intellectual life has to be spiritual and poetic and symbolic for the sake of the contemplation. The best balance for that is hard physical labor, not just a walk in the woods for physical activity, but I mean some sweaty work.
Well, what I'm doing, as you can see, I'm making boxes for cartons of eggs. Many people would think, well, that's a very insignificant job. And maybe I've had a certain academic background that people say, well, why should you be wasting your time by a very simple job that a chimpanzee almost could be trained to do? Well, we don't have chimpanzees here. And the point is that it isn't so much what we do, it's the intention and the love and concern for others. It isn't really the size or the grandeur or the seeming importance in life that matters. What about the ordinary tasks that everyone has to do in order to earn a living?
I think the community, it comes across a lot more strongly, more authentically when we're unloading egg cartons or we're unloading 50-pound bags of calcium or whatever. When you feel that person next to you and you know that the person is going through the same thing, there is a sense that we really are in this together, and that's so important in the monastic life and in the spiritual journey.
Well, I think Benedict was right in the 6th century when he put in his rule that there has to be a balance between work and prayer, that the whole liturgy of the hours is enhanced by that there's times when we work physically or mentally, and then we have time to pray.
A balanced life was not always easy for the monks to achieve. Successful monasteries like the Great Cluny, in what is now the center of French Burgundy, blossomed in wealth and power over the centuries. But success led to extravagance, then laxity. The monks' reaction against Cluny's excesses sparked another great monastic reform. In the 12th century, various groups of monks turned their backs on the wealthy monasteries to rediscover the simple life of Saint Benedict's rule. In the year 1098, one group of industrious monks left the prosperous monastery of Moulins to set up a new community in a marshy area of French Burgundy named Citeaux. They called themselves Cistercians, drained the swamps for their farmland, and built simple stone churches to underscore their poverty and humility. Mepkin Abbey's church was built in 1993, but its design reflects the same modest intent of Cistercian churches built nearly 900 years ago.
The church is the most important house among the houses of the community. It's a privileged place, more than all the others, because it's the place where, as a community, we meet Christ in His church. And so it has to symbolize that meeting. It's the meeting place where the liturgy of time meets the liturgy of eternity. In the Cistercian symbolism, according to St. Bernard, the church is also a symbol of the human body. And it's penetrated by the light of God, by grace. The walls are the human person. The windows are the openings for God's life. In that symbolism, the church becomes the intersection point between humanity and divinity. The church has to look like a jewel. It has to be a jewel, even a simple, austere jewel, but it has to mirror these eternal realities.
Church and prayer alone cannot support a monastic community. The reality of making a living faces all monasteries, and they solve this challenge in a variety of ways. Trappists are members of the Cistercian order of the strict observance.
Yes, we can take your order, sir.
Their constitution requires that the money they need to support their communities be earned by their own hands. Modern-day Trappists produce a wide range of goods, primarily foods and agricultural products that are popular and of high quality. They carefully package and market their products so that they will sell in a competitive marketplace and pay the bills.
When we first came here in 1949, we tried various industries to make a living. We baked bread and baked cinnamon buns. We had a saw mill in which we cut our own timber. We always had chickens for eggs from the very beginning. In the 60s, the eggs became the one industry that was really doing it for us. We gradually phased out all those other industries and concentrated on the egg. The economics dictate what works and what doesn't, and eggs work for us. The chickens produce about 30,000 eggs per day, which comes out to somewhere between 15,000 to 17,000 dozen a week.
I have been with Mepkin Abbey selling their eggs since 1963. I feel like that when a customer is walking out the door with a dozen Mepkin Abbey eggs, they're the very best that can be bought and put in a cart. The people who operate the farm is just fantastic to do business with. Year after year after year, they have the consistency that you're looking for in a supermarket.
I've talked to various egg producers around the country, and they are all in awe of the way that we handle our eggs, because we do put a lot on the quality of our eggs, and so therefore we do things that other people say that machines can do this better, why don't you go to a different system? The different system takes away that personal quality control, and that is what we do not want to relinquish.
In addition to eggs, the Mepkin monks make a unique garden product called Earth Healer. They recycle manure from their chickens and sawdust from a nearby furniture factory to create an all-natural compost for home gardeners.
We also came up with the idea of bagging it in little bags for tea, for compost tea. It's a gift item, but it really works. We've seen the difference it makes in growing of plants. All the micronutrients that plants need are in this tea. So the plants are just healthier looking and grow richer in color just through the tea. And we've got all kinds of testimonies from different people that have just amazingly found it really works.
For 400 years after the reforms of Citeaux, the Cistercians built their own network of wealthy, successful monasteries. But even greater reforms faced the monks of the 16th century. A growing middle class bridled at the extravagance of the church. The nobility was threatened by its power. And by 1540, the Protestant Reformation had engulfed Europe in a storm of religious turmoil. In France, England, and Germany, the bloody vengeance tore at the fabric of Western civilization. Monks were dragged from their beds, drawn and quartered, and boiled in oil. Abbots were tried and hanged for treason. In England, monasteries were looted and dissolved. The great abbeys were in ruins. Their art, music, and manuscripts were mostly forgotten. It was a new world of reformed religions, all-powerful monarchies, and an emerging merchant class. It would be up to new generations of monks to rediscover the ancient values of Saint Benedict and see if they held a place in the future.
Blessed be you, Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, for you have done great things for us. You consecrate us by your Spirit to make us the one body of your Son.
For today's Trappists, prayer is the primary activity. Worship together opens and closes the day. Work occupies a smaller but important part of their day, and the remainder is spent in a contemplative reading of the Bible, called Lectio Divina.
Well, there are three parts of one exercise, and the exercise, put quite simply, is prayer. But prayer not just in the way we normally think of prayer, but prayer in the sense of a whole life consecrated to God. The monastics call it continual prayer, coming from a pure heart.
Prayer has sustained monks for 1,700 years, but how does prayer fit into modern life? Harvard medical professor and author Dr. Herbert Benson explains.
The everyday prayers that monks do used to be part of our traditional society, till we got too busy to sit quietly 10 to 20 minutes to do this. They've sustained this practice, going further, of course, but we have learned scientifically by carrying out these practices for 10 to 20 minutes once or twice a day that the health, that the mental health, the quietude, the ability to deal with stress that the monks have can be captured by us within our regular busy lives. It's a terrible error to believe that we don't have time for this, because these very features can come to sustain us and protect us.
Kathleen Norris is a Presbyterian who spent nearly 18 months as a guest in a Benedictine monastery. She is author of the best-selling book, The Cloister Walk.
I think because there is that incredible repetition of psalms and scripture every day in a monastery, that listening is given great importance, and that's where the silence between the psalms and after the readings comes in, and there's that incredible slowed down pace that the liturgy imposes on human nerves, which is really good for me. I'm not a terribly patient person, so it takes me a while to slow down, but I think it's very good for me when I do that. And listening is all a part of that.
It's all about to foster what we truly are before God, to recognize our poverty, to recognize our real true weakness and helplessness inside. That is the atmosphere where prayer is born. When I truly understand the poverty that is within me, then I can understand what God is all about.
For Trappists, solitude and contemplation are key to their lives of prayer.
Well, I was in the Navy for 4 years aboard a destroyer, and being aboard ship, especially at night, did something to me. Just the vast solitude of the ocean, the immense silence, the stars at night, the moon, the reflection on the ocean, on the waves as they're breaking, sort of like diamonds just being scattered. Well, something was happening to me, and I didn't know what it was, but there was sort of an indefinable presence, I suppose, and I wanted it to be part of my life.
Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth.
I think there's a certain sense in which all of us, even monks, have to learn to be still where we are and not be thinking about what we're going to do next or what we've just done or anything of that sort. But again, it's the whole dynamic of being present to the present moment, to the people the person I'm with right now, being present to God, to kind of slow down so we can catch up with ourselves.
Thomas More is the author of several best-selling books that comment on the state of the soul in today's world.
I don't think we're aware of how much noise we have around us and how valuable it can be to be quiet. Sometimes when people go on retreat, the first thing they notice is the quiet, and they're astonished by it. At first they don't know how to deal with it, and they feel uncomfortable and have to talk. But then they get used to it and realize that quiet is not really an absence of sound. It's the opportunity to hear the world, to hear nature, just to hear a river flowing or to hear leaves blowing in the wind, to hear wind.
The aspect of solitude is important in any person's life. We're just not always with other people. I mean, if we're going to be able to have time to reflect on our experience, our relationships with others, whatever, we can't always kind of be engaged. It's like a conversation or music. You got to have space in between the notes, or it doesn't mean anything. The solitude is the space in between the notes.
The extravagance and extremes of King Louis XIV mark the world of 17th century France. The French church was dominated by Louis and reflected the riches and intrigues of his royal court. But the spirit of reform was still alive in the monasteries. In 1658, Armand de Rancé, a reformed libertine himself, became the abbot of the nearly forgotten Cistercian monastery of La Trappe. There he established one of the most rigorous monastic practices in the history of Christianity. The ascetic monks who followed him later became known as Trappists.
Well, in some very limited, finite way, La Trappe said, French culture is decadent. Well, we're going to live a life that's not decadent, that's self-denying, that's disciplined, that is really scripturally based, and maybe we can do a little bit of the redeeming of this culture.
The first monks at La Trappe went to extremes in their efforts to redeem their culture. The grim intensity of their asceticism shocks modern sensibilities. They ate barely enough food to keep alive, disciplined themselves with knotted cords, and slept on bare boards. Trappists have undergone many reforms over the past 300 years and have shed de Rancé's severest penances. However, asceticism and self-sacrifice are still important in the Trappist life and in most of the world's religions. Christians, Hebrews, and Muslims all have periods of fasting. Asceticism is fundamental in Buddhism and Hinduism.
Monastic life has been seen and is seen, and legitimately so, as something of a protest movement. I'm going to cut down on consumerism, on materialism, the things that so many people think are the be-all and the end-all of life. We don't judge any individual. But if I go through one of the great, and I won't mention the name of the store, but one of these enormous stores that has literally in their inventory, there must be 2 or 3 million different things in that one huge store, and you move into it, it's somewhat depressing when you're just overwhelmed by the things. It's not the kingdom come, but the thingdom come.
Asceticism in any kind of life, whether it's, we usually think of it in the spiritual life, but ascesis is a Greek word which just means kind of like training or something like that. And so with an athlete, or with a musician, or with a painter, there's a certain kind of ascesis. The same thing with monastic life. It's not like you're doing them to make yourself feel bad or something like that. You're doing it to open up a life for you.
It's amazing when you look down the choir, we're all wearing the same robes, the same white tunic, the same black scapular, the same kind of belt. The genius of keeping the habit forces the individual to go deeper to find his own identity. If you find it in clothes alone, I mean, you're not going to get very far in this life. And that's precisely the point. Got to go deeper than that, deeper than the skin.
I think certainly there are times when there are people that I miss, experiences that I've had that I miss, places that I've been to that I miss. But I think any kind of life without that sort of poignancy is really not a life worth living. Because without that, the choosing of this would not have the power that it does.
Monks choose to be celibate and chaste, which may be the most difficult choice in their ascetic life.
Celibacy is difficult for me and has been the hardest part of my life because of this great desire that is inborn in me, as in other people, for a deep, personal, intimate relationship with another human being, with a woman with whom I would be joined and create a family. And that never goes away. That desire is still there. At the same time, celibacy for me has been the most joyful aspect of my life as a monk, because it has implied and has brought with it a very deep relationship with Christ. And in becoming one with Him, I can relate to other people on that deeper level as well, on that level that allows an exchange that is more than a superficial exchange.
It's a constantly growing challenge to be a celibate in the monastery. You don't decide that you're going to be a celibate when you walk in the door and then it's finished. Unless you keep pace with it constantly, and it's a living following of Christ on a day-by-day basis, you're not going to be able to do it. You couldn't pretend to live a celibate life and grow as a human person, grow as a man or as a woman, unless you were receiving a lot of spiritual impetus to do this. We call it grace. It doesn't come naturally. It never does, no matter how many years you live it. It never gets easy.
I think it is true that coming from the outside and being here just for a brief amount of time, you say, isn't this a wonderful idyllic life that these gentlemen are able to live? However, once you've been here a number of times, you recognize that all humanity has struggles, and these monks have the same kind of struggles. But once you take away the distractions of society and you put people in this setting, the interior work is a fight sometimes. It's a battleground. It's certainly a beautiful life. I don't want to diminish that. But it's a struggling life. These gentlemen struggle.
The call to this life could be considered as kind of a call to live a life of poetry, but when you're dealing with chickens and eggs and your hands are getting dirty, it certainly is not bourgeois. It might be poetic, but it is never just simply very elegant in that sense.
Glory be to the Father and to the Son.
It's kind of unrelenting. There's just no break, especially in our kind of monasticism. You find your relaxation within those observances, and you find your intensity in those observances. And over a long period of time, in increments of maybe 2 or 3 years, you gradually take deeper and deeper steps into this communion with God.
In the 18th and 19th centuries, Europe struggled through war after war. In France, the cozy relationship between church and nobility crumbled during the French Revolution. Church lands were seized and monasteries were abolished as useless relics. For nearly 250 years since the Reformation, monks had kept to themselves, saying their prayers and tending their farms. But in the anti-church atmosphere of the Revolution and its aftermath, monks were hounded and exiled as enemies of the state. The Trappists were saved from extinction by Abbot Augustin de Lestrange, who led the only remaining group on a 10-year odyssey through Europe. in search of a permanent home. By the mid-1800s, Trappists had returned to France, and a few small communities were revived. But as Europe entered the Industrial Revolution, new threats of war bred new fears about their survival. The religious tolerance of America was seen as an alternative, and in 1848, the ancient monastery of Maier sent a group of more than 40 monks on a perilous 3,000-mile journey across the Atlantic. Their destination was a farm in the foothills of Kentucky named Gethsemane, where the monks would build the first permanent Trappist abbey in America. It is a deep commitment to community that has preserved the monastic way of life for so many centuries. A monastery is not really a community of friends, but a community based on a deep commitment to an ideal that is deeper and stronger than friendship.
Most of these people are people that I probably would not choose as my friends, which doesn't say anything about them. But we've all kind of been called here. It's living in this diversity, very different kinds of people from very different backgrounds, different countries, different cultural experiences, and also the different ages. I think that some people can get a very kind of myopic experience of life because they're always with kind of people their same age or culture or background or whatever. But here in the monastery, it's like, it's a little world.
I have dedicated myself to this community as a response to the call of God, and not as a response to a brother's good qualities or I want to spend a lot of time with you, but I'm here at this monastery because I believe that is where the Lord Jesus is calling me. And I believe that the others are responding that same way.
When we live together, one hand washes the other. And so there is this mutual support, and far from confining, it does expand one's own consciousness in some way. It might appear to be inhibiting and restraining, confining, but it's not that way really.
On the Myers-Briggs, I tend to be kind of right almost in the middle in terms of being more introverted and extroverted. People often think that monks should all be, extreme introverts. But if you're going to live in community, you have to like people. If you don't, this is not going to work.
Brother helping brother. We need the support. It's a support system that's built into community life that one really need to live such an austere life, to respond to God in such a way, the way that we're called to respond. We need the help of one another. A perfect example that I hear often is getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm sure it's a very tough thing if you try it. But if you have 30 other people with you getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning every day, it becomes a piece of cake.
Obviously, we try to base ourselves on the dictum of the Word of God that do not let the sun go down on your anger. And if there is something, we try to at least say, hey, brother, we've disagreed on this. Let's disagree, but let's not be angry at each other.
The impact of World War II brought a surge of new monks into America's monasteries, including the great spiritual writer Thomas Merton, who became a Trappist monk at Gethsemane. To accommodate its growth, Gethsemane founded the new monasteries Holy Spirit in Conyers, Georgia, and Holy Trinity in Huntsville, Utah. Wishing to deepen the religious life of South Carolina's people, Bishop Emmett Walsh of Charleston invited the abbot of Gethsemane to establish a monastery in the state's Low Country. This was the spur that created Mepkin Abbey in 1949. Mepkin was originally a colonial rice plantation worked by slaves. During the American Revolution, it was owned by Henry Laurens, a patriot leader in the war. In the 1930s, Mepkin was purchased by Time magazine founder Henry Luce and his wife, Claire Booth Luce. They gave the land to the monks after the death of Claire Booth's daughter, Anne Claire Brokaw. All are buried on the monastery's land. To the monks, Mepkin is a holy place, made sacred by its grace and gifts, and they have committed to it forever. A monk's vow to his community builds from a day into a lifetime. He lives in a brotherhood where the young and the old learn to get along and stay together, always.
Monks never retire. It's a concept maybe that is foreign to American culture of the 1990s, but we don't retire. We may be forced to slacken off, but we never really simply retire.
The long-standing monastic tradition is to live, work, and die in place. To live the whole life cycle as a monk. It's the seniors, the very old ones, who have probably the most wisdom to pass on, even in their weakness. Even in some cases, their helplessness. They remind us that that's the stance of the human person before God. Boniface is 87, still working every day. And we think, and just from a sociological point of view, that it's the demands of the daily tasks in his work that keep him going. And he remains an icon of what it means to be human. Work hard and rest well, and be vitally interested in everything. And he participates vigorously in community dialogues. Has very strong opinions about this and about that. And he's often the prophetic voice in the group. Why don't you face the truth, he'll say. It's looking at you in the face. There it is. Why are we wasting this time? It's wonderful.
Given the realities of the 21st century, modern monasteries like Mepkin Abbey are opening their doors to the outside world in many ways. Although their way of life may seem out of place in the computer age, there has been increasing interest in monks. Gregorian chant CDs sell millions of copies as a stressed-out culture begins to pay more attention to the monastic pace of life.
We have created something in this modern world that's quite fascinating and interesting, but basically soulless and heartless. We don't give much to the heart in this world. We give everything to shiny, bright tools and instruments, and we measure our progress by the kind of instruments that we make and the tools we have, and computers and televisions and rockets and all these things that we're so proud of. Now that world is pretty crazy precisely because it doesn't have a heart to match it, to give it a human dimension.
Monasticism says that there is a depth of meaning, there is an underside, if you will, a hidden, almost instinctual side to everything that we do, including going to the soccer game and meeting the babysitter on time and trying to cope with human needs at the same time. Everything that we do has meaning, more so than is on the surface.
It is a paradox that monasteries have a reputation for being closed to the world. The rule of Benedict has always urged monasteries to welcome guests. Throughout history, they have offered shelter and sanctuary to both casual travelers and those with a more serious spiritual purpose. At Mepkin Abbey, visitors may stay overnight in more than a dozen private guest rooms. They share meals and prayer with the monks and come and go freely. Visitors are religious or non-religious, Catholic and non-Catholic, men and women. Throughout the year, many people visit the monastery to worship, attend a retreat, or just wander the grounds. In monastic guest programs, monasteries welcome individuals who want to experience the monk's life to a fuller extent. Cal Myers is a retired Methodist minister who visits Mepkin Abbey for periods of a month or more and participates in all aspects of monastic life.
Upright, I was pleasantly surprised to discover the hospitality and the welcome that I received here. Here, you live in with the monks, sing in the choir with them, eat with them, work with them.
Well, of course, as you know, we have a very intense hospitality program, and therefore a lot of people come here who go through conversions. Over the years that I've been here, I've seen many, many people deeply touched by this life that they can't find really anywhere else because that's our lifestyle. And so they come here and they see the Word incarnate.
There's kind of a sense of kind of radiating rings of inclusion into the monastic community.
Is this your first visit here, or have you been here before? Well, anyway.
There certainly is no longer the sense that we try to keep people out, which certainly, I think in the popular understanding of Trappists, it was like we were behind walls and we could never be gotten to. I think the sense now is to share our experience with others.
Celia Carasoli owns a busy restaurant in the city of Charleston. She is a frequent visitor.
What happens when I talk to people about Mepkin, they always have what I think now are kind of funny questions. They say things to me like, do the brothers talk? You know, can you speak to them when you go out there? And of course I just hoop and holler laughing because of course you could speak to them. That's the whole idea. You eat with them, you pray with them, and you worship with them, and you walk with them, and they're here. You realize when you come here that they see a much bigger picture than we do when we're out in the day-to-day world stressed out and trying to put out fires every day and handle employees and everything else. They see a much larger picture.
With some kind of order, help yourself.
My name is Zev Chaim Feyer. I'm a rabbi, and I've been in Charleston for a little over a year. I've been working as a hospital chaplain. I come to Mepkin from time to time for a day of spiritual centering and just to relax and get away from the everyday activities. I share a lot with the monks here. They are very supportive of where I'm at. There's no pressure to change who I am. And there's a strong feeling of support for my own spiritual path.
John Boudreau is an architect from Columbia, South Carolina. He's married and has 5 children. He visits sometimes for an hour or two, sometimes as long as 5 days.
Coming to a monastery is non-threatening, not frightening. It's just so warm and wonderful. It's an opportunity that we, as normal, average people, just don't take advantage of. It takes work to develop a spiritual life, and you're not looking at the good example of perfect spiritual life. You're looking at somebody who's trying my best to get there, and the monks at Mepkin really play a large part in helping me with that.
Monasteries have always been a refuge, and they have always been preservers of learning. As part of its outreach to the modern world, Mepkin is building a state-of-the-art library to house its 25,000-volume collection of books and electronic media. Barbara Pierce is a professional librarian who helps the monks computerize their library.
It's a rather eclectic library, and it encompasses a wide variety of things and many old books, which are very rare and very valuable. I would like to think that the monks here are really saving a great deal for posterity. Hopefully, other people will use these and will appreciate what they have done. It's a wonderful collection.
The library will be open to anyone and be connected via the internet to people throughout the world. Perhaps surprisingly, monks have embraced computers and the internet. Many monasteries have sophisticated websites, and the artistry that goes into their design echoes the monks' work of 10 centuries ago. Besides their books and art, monasteries throughout history have contributed to Western civilization in other ways. Mepkin Abbey opens its doors for concerts and seminars at which hundreds of people get a glimpse into the life of a monastery.
We do not create a little ghetto here in the woods of South Carolina that's apart from the local community. And so we feel we have to be open to their influence on us and our influence out there.
Ellen Dressler-Morrill is the director of the City of Charleston's Office of Cultural Affairs. She coordinates its annual Piccolo Spoleto Arts Festival.
Everything that the community does in presenting its resources and making them available not only to Piccolo Spoleto, but they do a lot of other things there too, is something that enriches the lives and the spirits of everybody who have the good fortune to go there and experience that. And I think that's what the church is and has been since it started thousands of years ago.
For 17 centuries, monks have always found a place in a world that has not always been friendly to them. In their mix of ancient wisdom, practicality, community, and dreams, is there something to be learned as we enter the 21st century?
I think the reason religious communities work, especially a group like the Trappists, is that they have found a very effective way to stop time. That's the first step, I would say, that they have toward a really soulful style of life. And because of that, I think it's very valuable for the rest of us to watch them, to look and say, what are they doing? And is there any way in which I can take a piece of that for myself?
I think there is a little bit of monk in everyone. It's part of what God, I think, is born into us. Call it imago Dei or soul or spirit, whatever. I think God has made that into humanity. So one comes apart for a while to let God touch that part of us. And once that part is touched, then I think when you go back home, then you begin to seek ways of incorporating that into your daily life.
I think that one of the reasons many people, including many Protestants such as myself, go to monasteries and keep going back to monasteries is that they are a reminder of what life can be. They kind of bring us back to ourselves because, to me anyway, they refresh me, they renew my sense of who I really am and what I'm really about in the world.
You know, I think Augustine's right. Our hearts are restless till we find our rest in God. And God wants that for everybody, not just for monks. So Mepkin exists not just for the monks who are here, certainly for them, but this place exists for those who want to come apart and have God touch them.
Who